There's a room she enters only in dreams. It's not a room, exactly, more like an observatory stripped bare, halfway between memory and vacuum. The walls curve upward, smooth like bone, and above her, instead of sky, there is something darker than space. A sphere, perfectly still, reflecting nothing. She moves carefully, like each step might wake it. Her breathing is slow, deliberate. She doesn't speak. There's no one to hear. In the center of the room, a pedestal. On it, a mirror, but not flat. It curves inward, like gravity caught in glass. She looks down. In the reflection, Earth, but not as she knows it. No continents. No blue. A version of home she does not remember living in. There are planets we've never really seen, only glimpsed through data and digital breath. Mars, red and lonely. Venus, drowned in its own atmosphere. Saturn, beautiful and useless. We call them dead. We say uninhabitable like we know what life should look like. But what if that word only describes life as we are, not as it could be? NNSHE raises a hand to the mirror. Her fingers don't touch glass. They touch gravity. The image distorts. Mars flashes green for a moment. A river curls like a vein across its equator. Then it's gone. They told us Earth was special, not unique, but rare. Balanced just enough. Wet just enough. Shielded by a magnetic field and held by a perfect sun. But what if rarity isn't truth, just the lens of our own biology? What if we are seeing silence because we don't know how to hear? And behind her, the mirror begins to shift. One by one, planets emerge. Not icons, not diagrams. Worlds. Venus, with lights flickering just beneath its clouds. Europa, cracked with warmth. Titan, whispering in methane. They hover around her like sleeping animals. She doesn't flinch. She breathes. Life as we know it is fragile. But life as we don't might be inevitable. NNSHE closes her eyes, not in fear, but recognition. We've never been alone, only blind. There's a kind of silence that only exists in space. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of medium. No air. No vibration. Just distance. It's the kind of silence that seeps into questions we've stopped asking. Not because we found answers, but because the asking became too loud, too uncomfortable. One of those questions is simple, almost childlike. What if every planet had life? Not in theory, not as microbes or fossils or maybes, but now. Breathing, evolving, watching. What if Earth isn't the only blue dot, just the only one that's speaking our language? NSHE stands in the hallway of an orbital station, barely lit. Outside the thick window, Saturn. Not an image, not a render. The real thing, heavy with rings and ghostlight. But that's not what holds her eyes. It's the flicker. Deep within one of its moons, there's movement. Repetitive. Intentional. Like a signal trying not to be one. NNWE call them uninhabitable because they don't look like home. Too cold. Too dense. Too far. But those are rules for our kind of life. What if Venus doesn't care about oxygen? What if Europa doesn't need light? Evolution isn't loyal. It doesn't strive for similarity. It adapts. It mutates. It becomes NNTHE. Girl leans forward, forehead gently touching the glass. On the other side, Titan glows softly. Not bright, but with depth, like light trying to remember its shape. Somewhere below that thick orange haze, methane lakes breathe, tides rise, and something moves with rhythm. There's a term in astronomy, the Goldilocks zone. The not too hot, not too cold region where life might thrive. But that idea is built on our skin, our lungs, our fragile chemical needs. What if life doesn't care about our comfort zone? What if we've been measuring habitable by the temperature of our blood? NNSHE closes her eyes and breathes in artificial air. But her mind drifts outward, past the station, past the gravity well, toward Mercury. The one we dismiss first. Barren, overcooked. Yet under the right crust, shielded from radiation, life could burrow. Not walk, not swim, but pulse. Somewhere deep, between tectonic plates and the slow hum of metal-rich soil, something might be listening to the sun, converting its fury into thought. We've mapped the planets, photographed their scars. But we've never really asked, what does life look like when it doesn't want to be found? Maybe it's not missing. Maybe it's hiding. On purpose. NNSHE walks slowly down the corridor now, glancing at small indicator lights, each blinking in its own tempo. They remind her of heartbeats. Distant. Uneven. Alive. What if Mars once had oceans, not just water? What if they weren't lost, but taken? Consumed by a species that fed on hydrogen? What if the silence we interpret as death is digestion? There's something eerie about the symmetry of the solar system. Like planets were arranged not just by physics, but by design. Spaced out. Shielded. Balanced. Not for collision, but for containment. NNSHE steps into another chamber. A sphere of projection surrounds her, lighting up each planetary body with atmospheric simulations. But something's off. Venus flashes too warm. Neptune too quiet. Pluto isn't cold enough. Data fragments pulse across the walls like digital nerves. As if the system is lying, or remembering something it shouldn't. You can terraform a planet, but can you unterraform one? NNSHE whispers the names of the planets, one by one, as if they were people. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Each name lands differently. Some like stone, some like breath. She hesitates at Earth, says it quietly, like a secret. N. What if Earth is just one version of the same experiment? NSHE raises her hand, and the projection dims. The station falls quiet again, except for the soft hum of orbit and the distant click of thermal plates contracting. She doesn't move. Outside, Saturn's rings fracture light into waves across her face. Inside, her pupils widen, not from fear, but from the weight of seeing too much at once. NNTHE question was never, are we alone? It was, what if we never were and just didn't know how to listen? The difference between alive and not is not as sharp as we want it to be. We imagine life as movement, warmth, replication, but there are places on Earth where nothing moves for centuries, yet everything waits. Glaciers whisper. Deep rock breathes. In Antarctica, beneath 2 miles of ice, a lake pulses every 12 hours, not from tides, but from memory stored in pressure. That's not metaphor. That's physics. Earth holds life in places we can't survive. Why would other planets be any different? NNSHE stands beside a hydroponic module, fingers trailing the condensation on its surface. Leaf veins spread beneath the glass like maps of blood. Each plant grows toward an artificial sun, slow and silent. But they are not reacting to light. They are anticipating it. Evolution builds not on response, but on foresight. Even a cell learns. NNWEs say Jupiter is a gas giant, uninhabitable, a world without surface. But 400 miles beneath its clouds, pressure reaches 40 million times what we feel here. That's not the absence of life, that's compression. What if awareness doesn't need air, only structure, thought, embedded in fluid hydrogen, neurons made of atmosphere, not creatures, not machines, just intention, suspended in weather. And outside the window, the moons pass. Ganymede, largest of all, hums with a magnetic field stronger than Mercury's. Under its ice shell, an ocean deeper than any on Earth. Salt water, warmed by the pull of its planet, never seeing light. If you fell into it, you'd sink for days. But even there, things move. Slowly, blindly. One simulation suggests the heat of Ganymede's core, could power chemical reactions equal to 17 Niagaras per second. That's not environment. That's metabolism. NNSHE walks down a hallway lined with instruments, each tuned not to look, but to sense. Vibration, density, magnetic anomaly. On one screen, Venus flickers. Its clouds are rich in sulfuric acid, and yet, 75 kilometers above the surface, there's a band with pressure and temperature just like Earth's. Their particles behave strangely, absorb light when they shouldn't, reflect patterns that mimic growth. It's not proof, but it's not noise either. Some scientists call it the gray life problem. Life that doesn't resemble life. No DNA, no division, only process. If it adapts, if it survives, if it interacts, maybe that's enough. Maybe we've missed it, not because it's rare, but because it's alien. Not in shape. In logic, NNSHE touches her temple, a gesture not of pain, but calibration. The hum of artificial gravity presses gently against her spine. Even here, biology bends to machinery. Our bodies adapt to planets we were never made for. What if others already did, millions of years before us? Imagine a world where sound travels not through air, but light, where vision is sonar, where death is just a phase of motion. Life doesn't have to look like us. It only has to endure. NNSHE enters the sensorium, a darkened room that interprets distant signals into image and tone. A soft vibration fills the air. It's a data stream from Enceladus. Plumes rising like inverted rain from beneath its icy shell. Within them, complex organics, heavy molecules, something more than carbon. Not life, but its vocabulary. Not to data its listens. Not to the data. To the delay between pulses. The hesitation. The rhythm. As if the moon is speaking, but only in size. And NWE, forget that life on Earth began without oxygen, without sunlight, in places too dark and too hot for comfort. But life didn't care. It just began. Maybe it always does. In one simulation, Venus and Mars had oceans billions of years ago. Deep ones. Long-lasting. Maybe long enough. Long enough for something to crawl, to swim, to climb. But time is brutal. Atmospheres can turn. Shields can collapse. And with them, everything becomes dust. Unless it adapts. Unless it remembers. NNSHE steps out of the chamber and stands before a display of Earth, rotating slowly. The only world we call home. The only world we trust to be alive. But even here, most of life is invisible. Most of it never moves. Most of it never asks. NNSO. Maybe the question isn't whether other planets can hold life. Maybe it's whether we're capable of seeing it when it doesn't look like hope. There's something unsettling about certainty. The way we build models, run simulations, draw lines across cosmic bodies like property, as if the universe were waiting for us to define it. But what if everything we've labeled as dead is just misdiagnosed? What if we walked into a cathedral and called it abandoned because no one spoke our language? What if we've been stepping over signals not meant for ears, but for something else entirely? NNSHE sits at the edge of a synthetic pool designed to replicate Europa's salinity. Around her, lab lights stutter in cycles, mimicking the eclipses cast by Jupiter. She closes her eyes, listening not to sound, but to pressure. Each wave is a breath from a world too far to touch. Yet somehow, it knows she's here. And in 2023, we discovered phosphine in Venus's atmosphere. A molecule we don't fully understand, one that shouldn't exist there without biology. It might be a false positive. It might be contamination. But what if it's not? What if it's a signature, faint and deliberate? Not a cry for help, but a refusal to be forgotten. NNSHE reaches into the pool, scooping a handful of cold water. It slips through her fingers, leaves behind a trace of salt. Memory, disguised as mineral. Like the moons we dismiss, Ganymede, Callisto, Titan, each cloaked in cold, carrying the chemistry of origins. There's a theory, rarely spoken aloud, that planets evolve intelligence in cycles. That life isn't a spark, but a wave. It rises, peaks, then vanishes, leaving only silence behind. We might not be the first civilization in the solar system. Only the latest, NNSHE, walks now, deeper into the observatory. Walls covered in tapestries of data, spectral scans, heat maps, density plots. But there, in the noise, a pattern, a pulse that repeats every 92 hours. Origin, Neptune's moon Triton. It's not language. It's not even logic. But it's not random. What if the planets once spoke to each other? Not with words, but with resonance. Gravitational rhythms. Magnetic harmonics. A solar-scale nervous system pulsing with ancient communication. And we, late arrivals, are just background static, too loud to hear the echo. NNSHE reaches a chamber lined with dusted helmets, relics from previous missions. Each one carries the breath of a different planet. Each one holds the silence of someone who saw something they couldn't explain. On one, the visor is cracked. A single scratch curves across it. Not accidental. Intentional. Almost. Like writing N. There's no proof, only patterns. But maybe that's enough. NNTHE Cassini probe once crashed into Saturn to avoid contaminating its moons. We called it noble. But what if we were wrong? What if what lived there was watching? What if the final images we captured weren't observations, but intrusion? NNSHE picks up a recording ambient data from the Huygens lander on Titan. The sounds are unclassifiable, pressure fluctuations that mimic heartbeat, temperature spikes in perfect ratios. For years we called them anomalies. But anomalies are only mistakes until they repeat. Then they're systems. And every system has intent. NNSHE pauses before a digital globe of Mars. With a gesture, she rewinds its atmosphere, layer by layer, until rivers appear. Then oceans. Then clouds. Then nothing. A blackout. A gap in data history. As if something deliberately erased itself. Self-erasure is a kind of intelligence. One we're not ready to recognize. NNSHE presses her hand against the glass, face close. For a moment, her reflection overlaps the red curve of Martian terrain. Her breath fogs the surface. It looks like a storm. A tiny one. Human in scale. But enough to stir something. What if we're not discovering these worlds? What if we're awakening them? What if the silence we hear isn't silence at all? The deeper we look, the more familiar things begin to feel, not in detail, but in tension. There's a kind of déjà vu in the architecture of distant moons, a geometry that resembles thought. Grooves in the ice like neural paths, valleys shaped not by weather, but by memory. And you begin to wonder, what if planets remember? Not with brains, with structure, with temperature, with the rhythm of orbit. What if gravity is their form of nostalgia? NNSHE sits cross-legged inside a heat-monitoring dome, eyes closed, hands resting on the floor. Beneath her, a slab of rock taken from the surface of Mars. It's warm, not artificially, not geothermally, it just is. A pulse every 19 seconds. Faint, like breath trapped in stone. She doesn't speak, she listens. There are no words. But something answers. In Earth isn't a standard. It's a symptom, a particular arrangement of improbabilities that happen to settle long enough to call itself life. But maybe life isn't rare. Maybe stasis is. Maybe the real anomaly is how long we've remained stable enough to wonder. On Europa, there are ridges that stretch for thousands of kilometers, perfectly symmetrical, evenly spaced. We've explained them as tectonic shifts. But no tectonic system is that precise. Unless precision is the point. Unless pattern is the language. NNSHE walks down a passage lined with pulse sensors. They track movement in electromagnetic fields. Most of the time, there's nothing. Just static. But sometimes, they spike, as if something large moved beneath the crust of an otherwise inert world. These are logged, filed, dismissed, but the spikes match known biological cycles, not from Earth, from whales. Migratory patterns, sleep rhythms, As if something huge, slow, and ancient were dreaming in orbit. NNWE keep looking for reflections of ourselves. Carbon, water, respiration. But what if another form of life evolved from silence itself? No metabolism, no ambition, just awareness, embedded into the mineral logic of moons. What if thought could crystallize? Not metaphorically, literally. Memory as lattice. Emotion as vibration. NNSHE moves through the AI analysis bay, walls flickering with simulations. In one, Titan's methane lakes ripple with structures. Not random. Grids. Echoes of movement. Not life as body. Life as architecture. Something that built itself without tools. Just time. There's a term, panspermia. The idea that life travels across the stars, not in ships but in fragments. Frozen spores. Viral code. Dust with DNA. We think of it as origin theory. But what if it's not about beginning? What if it's consequence? A signal sent not to seed life, but to warn it? NNSHE pulls a drawer. Inside, a sliver of a comet fragment. It's been here for decades, studied, cataloged, forgotten. But recently, something changed. Tiny fractures forming in its structure, as if reacting to proximity, as if waking up and matter isn't passive. Even here, on Earth, we know that. Water remembers temperature. Metal responds to intention. We don't understand how. But we see it, over and over. What if the line between living and non-living isn't about biology? What if it's about response? NSHE stands before a wall-sized display. On it, Venus, rendered not in color, but in tone. Frequencies layered into a soundscape. It plays softly, the planet hums, a dense, constant wave, until a drop, sudden, unexplained. A change not in temperature, but in rhythm. Like a hesitation. Like breath before speech. NNWE call it weather. And what if it's syntax? NNSHE doesn't look surprised, just quiet, as if she's known this for a long time and is only now ready to admit it. You can't terraform a planet without asking what it remembers. You can't land without trespass. Every footprint is a sentence. Every signal is a scream. What if we're not exploring? What if we're interrupting? There's a moment in every expedition where curiosity turns to reverence. When data becomes presence. When distance collapses and NSHE returns to the Mars rock, places her palm against it once more. The pulse is stronger now, more regular, almost aware of her touch. She doesn't pull back, because some things aren't meant to be proven, only felt. There are numbers that don't belong on a spreadsheet. Figures that ache when you look at them too long. In the data streams from Saturn's rings, a gap appears every 47 hours. Regular. Predictable. But what's disturbing isn't the gap. It's the pattern around it, like breath held before a sentence, then never spoken. That kind of rhythm doesn't come from geology. It comes from intention. NNSHE sits alone in the dim light of the control bay, face lit by slowly rotating planetary readouts. Her eyes track the data, but she's not reading. She's remembering. Not something she lived, something deeper. Something like inheritance. A memory, not hers, but known. Necdolian on Earth, we measure habitability in lux, Kelvin, pascals. But somewhere between all the thresholds, we forgot to ask, what does life feel like to itself? We catalog survival. We don't measure longing. NNTHE human body is made of stardust. We say that often, as if it explains something. But maybe it's not explanation. Maybe it's permission. To feel connected to what came before. To what we'll never see. To what might still be out there. Quietly aware of us, NNSHE opens a file of recorded anomalies from the outer system. Clicks through them like photographs of someone you used to know but never met. One spike from Uranus's magnetosphere looks exactly like the brain's delta wave during dream state. Not similar. Identical. It lasts 3 seconds. Then silence. No repetition, no follow-up. As if the planet briefly fell asleep. Or briefly woke up. Sometimes she speaks into the recorder even when no one's listening. not logs, not updates. Just thoughts. Sentences that start with, "I wonder," and end with, "I don't know." But lately, those recordings are changing. Pauses are growing longer. Her voice, quieter. As if she's speaking with something, not just to it. What if connection doesn't require recognition? What if the solar system is not a sequence of objects, but a family of awarenesses? Each one slow, enormous, incomprehensibly old, and dreaming. NNSHE stares at Earth now, floating in its usual corner of the display. It looks warm, familiar, but small. So small. For a moment, she imagines how it would appear from Neptune. Just a dot, a faint pixel of blue. Insignificant. And yet, if Earth is the only one not listening, maybe that's the real anomaly. NNWE. Assume intelligence is about thought, tools, language. But crows use memory. Octopuses escape without training. Trees communicate through fungal webs. Maybe consciousness isn't rare. Maybe it's ambient. A byproduct of complexity. A tendency of systems to feel. NNSHE walks to the greenhouse. Touches the soft edge of a leaf. Under her fingers, its cells open slightly, adjusting to warmth. It doesn't think. But it knows. Just enough to respond. Venus doesn't need oceans to feel. Mars doesn't need cities to remember. Saturn doesn't need eyes to watch. NNSHE remembers a night from childhood, lying in a field, staring up, imagining the planets like gods, watching back. She didn't need proof. She needed presence. Maybe nothing's changed. And outside, the stars begin to shift as the station rotates. Light bends through the windows, landing on her face. It makes her look older. Or maybe just seen. NNTHE data feeds keep cycling. But she doesn't check them. Not now, not tonight. Instead, she whispers, a single word, a name, not scientific, personal, a name no one else would use for a planet, a name she gave it, because connection isn't always about discovery. Sometimes it's about intimacy. What if all this time we were trying to prove life out there? Because we were afraid to admit how alone we feel in here. There's a point in silence when it stops being empty. When the absence of voice becomes presence itself. Not vacancy, but weight. Like entering a cathedral after everyone's gone and realizing something still listens. NNSHE stands at the edge of the observation deck. No windows now, just exposure. A full 360-degree projection of deep space. Every star rendered in precise alignment. The planets move as they do in real time. Patient, distant, gravitationally bound to one another like siblings that stopped speaking centuries ago but never drifted apart. She doesn't move. Her breath slows. Her presence dims. Not from fear, but from the kind of awe that erases identity. And Earth turns, slow and oblivious. Venus burns. Neptune hums. But something is changing. Not in them, but in her. The question has been gnawing for days. Quiet, shapeless, then suddenly sharp. Not if all planets were habitable, and we arrived too late. There's no evidence of war, no debris, no ruins. Just hints, rhythmic pulses, fractured signals, geological scars that don't align with physics, as if what once lived there learned how to vanish cleanly. Not extinction, not erasure, more like withdrawal. A planetary decision to stop being seen. NNSHE lowers herself onto the floor. The light from Jupiter flickers across her hands. She places them flat against the projection deck, feels nothing, and everything. These planets are not landscapes, not spheres of gas and rock. They are postures, choices. The way each one moves, or refuses to, tells a story. A memory encoded in orbit. NNWE keep asking where is everyone? But maybe they were never meant to be found. Maybe intelligence isn't expansion, but retreat. Not colonization, but concentration. A turn inward. A refusal to echo. NNSHE blinks, and for a second, the ring around Saturn splits, revealing not empty space but a structure, enormous, curved, organic. A hallucination? A glitch? or a memory. It's gone before her brain can name it. But something inside her recognizes the shape, not logically, viscerally, as if it has always been there. What if they left the system not by propulsion, but by perception? What if the next stage of life isn't upward or outward, but inward, past time, past space, into something no telescope can hold? NSHE opens her mouth to speak, but says nothing. Her voice doesn't belong here. Not now. Not in this atmosphere of vanishing. N in her lap. A notebook. Not digital. Not efficient. Paper. Handwritten. She flips to the last page. There's no summary. Just a single sentence NN. What if Earth is the only one who forgot? And a soft chime behind her. The AI requests a check-in. She doesn't respond. Instead, she closes her eyes and imagines every planet as a consciousness. Not alive like us, but aware, subtle, patient, grieving, maybe. Not because we arrived, but because we misunderstood. NNSHE stands. Walks slowly through the dark, past instruments and readouts, past sensors still listening, past machines that do not dream. She stops at the inner bay, where the water tank holds its synthetic tide. She places her hand on the surface. The reflection of Saturn ripples, breaks, then reforms. This was never about finding others. It was about recognizing that we've always been surrounded, not by aliens, but by intelligences we don't know how to name. Planets that feel, moons that remember, a system that never needed us to complete it, only to witness it, quietly, briefly. Before we too vanish, what if all planets were habitable, but time moved differently on each one? NAND Earth was the last to wake up. NNSHE exhales.